that were mentioned, there will be 2 deputy sheriffs assigned to every shelter. Our courthouse is closed, our schools are closed, so essentially we have a force multiplier with those deputies that are typically assigned those duties will be out patrolling. We take this very serious. I am tasked with making sure this county is safe, and I can assure you, starting at 6 p.m. tonight, with the volume of deputy sheriffs that will be on the streets until this storm passes, this will be a safe community.
Thank you. I'm Jason Brown, County Administrator. I just want to say, please take these directions that we're giving, these emergency protective measures. If you follow these recommendations, we're recommending these to keep you safe. Please look at the county's website, ircgov.com, our emergency services page. You can sign up for our app to get up-to-date information. Please follow this information if you're in an evacuation area. Please heed those warnings. We have excellent folks here, from the law enforcement to fire rescue to the emergency management, to help keep the folks safe. But please take this event seriously and take those protective measures so that we can all be safe. Thank you.
I have a question for Sheriff Lloyd.
Yes, ma'am.
Will there be a curfew in place?
That has not been determined yet. That is a post-event decision that if it's made, will be made by myself in concert with the county administrator. One thing I'd also like to add is that when wind speeds reach 39 miles per hour, which is the beginning of tropical storms, our bridges will be closed. Our bridges will be closed. As Mr. King stated earlier, those are low-lying. The bases of those bridges are very low. We're concerned about storm surge and the like. So if you live on the barrier island and elect not to evacuate, as we're strongly encouraging, there will not be access back over the bridges or onto the island. So keep that in mind. 39 miles per hour, we will make that decision, and those bridges will be closed in an effort to save lives.
Sheriff, will you be physically going door to door with the evacuations, or is this a mandatory evac announcement?
We will not be going door to door. Fire rescue will be making notification, as well as deputy sheriffs. We'll not be going door to door. We're hoping our message gets spread in venues like this. But the fact is, we've been encouraging evacuations already. The mandatory simply puts the public on notice that if things which we know are going to deteriorate, law enforcement and fire and EMS cannot respond in particular conditions. So our message is to heed our message and get off the island if you can.
Why wait until tomorrow morning to say mandatory evacuation? Why not say it now, get people started?
We don't expect the winds in our county from the National Weather Service is suggesting late tomorrow that those winds will be here. We think people would probably do better to voluntarily evacuate today, but mandatory tomorrow. There is time if they leave at 8 o'clock in the morning to get to their destination safely. And we just think that's a good way to manage this storm, and it keeps people in public shelters a less amount of time inconvenienced. But if the plans are done, they should be able to leave at 0800 and get to their destination long before deterioration of the wind conditions.
When you expect, you said late afternoon, what time frame are you guys thinking they'll?
The National Weather Service hasn't given us an exact time. They are suggesting that sometime around 2 o'clock, the winds will be starting to pick up in the Treasure Coast area. Again, the ground speed of this storm has ranged anywhere from 8 miles an hour to 12 miles an hour over the last 36 hours. And so 2 or 3 miles an hour can make a big difference on what time the storm gets here. But we still think that 8 o'clock is the time that people need to leave for a mandatory evacuation.
Based on the information, I mean, you guys are in with the briefings, and we can't see in, but apparently they're in there. Meeting, talking about, where this storm is going. What is your understanding the risk for Indian River County residents at this point?
The risk is the National Weather Service is telling us that almost all of Indian River County could experience hurricane force winds. The closer that eye moves to the coastline, the outer bands of this storm are almost 185 miles at 39 miles an hour. And don't be confused when somebody says hurricane force winds. Hurricane force winds are 74 miles an hour or greater. Tropical force winds is where people get confused. They think tropical force, they think 39 miles an hour, and tropical force is 39 miles an hour to 74 miles an hour. So if you're thinking that tropical force winds aren't dangerous, they could be well in excess of 50 miles an hour.
The biggest concern many people have is the storm surge. It's not a secret, Orchid Island, Hutchinson Island, they're pretty low barrier islands as far as islands go. What type of surge? Are you expecting these waves to go up and over the island like we saw in Francis and Jean?
The National Weather Service is telling us about 3 to 6 foot storm surge. We had very few areas in Jean and Francis where the sea actually breached the dune line, and most of that was in the North County where the Bear Island is very, very narrow. But I would tell you from past experience that those properties adjacent to the intercoastal waterway are at a lower elevation than the dune line. So people think, well, if it doesn't come across the dune line, then we're going to be okay. And that is not the message we're trying to get out. That water backs up. The high tide from the ocean, that artificial high tide, backs up into the inlets, and the approaches to the bridges could flood very quickly, and it still hasn't come across the dune line. And so the message is we need people to get off the island as quickly as they can after 8 o'clock tomorrow.
Where are you at with high tide versus when the storm impact is gonna be the greatest?
Well, of course, there is some concern about having a high tide. The tides are not that substantial between high and low. Actually, we think that the storm surge, of course, a storm tide on top of a high tide is worse, but I'm more concerned about the 3 to 6 feet and the pounding that's going to come with a wind blowing those waves up on the beach. And we also expect a lot of beach erosion from this storm, a great deal of beach erosion.
I mean, at this point, are you planning to have severe property damage along the coast? Is that sort of,
I would like to say I'd hope that nobody has property damage anywhere in this county, but I think I'm a realist enough to know that we know they're going to have beach damage. As far as property damage, I can't speculate. Many of the homes that are on the Bear Island are built to a newer building code. They will withstand more wind than some of the very older homes in the community. Many of the homes in this community, people have experienced 2004, 2005 hurricanes. They have shutters, they've made preparations, and it could be pockets because we could have isolated areas where they have more damage than just one area. I'm not suggesting the only damage we're gonna have in this community is on the Barrier Island. We're trying to protect the entire county, everybody that lives here.
so Sheriff, by tomorrow evening, what is the protocol? Your men and women are out on the street until what mile per hour? I mean, at what point can people not get emergency services?
Well, that question is obviously a good question. One thing they have to keep in mind, the wind speeds on the Barrier Island versus the wind speeds in our western community at the same time could vary greatly. That decision is going to be made by our in-the-field incident commanders in concert with the municipalities that are here. In the past, when the winds obviously have gotten over 40 miles per hour, there's been sheltering in place, and that's what we anticipate doing as well. Senator Bill Nelson is here.
Yes, sorry, I was trying to let him in.
Senator, welcome.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
I have spoken to Craig Fugate, the head of FEMA. He is particularly credentialed to handle a hurricane in Florida because he used to be our Florida EOC director. He is ready. He has in warehouses a number of supplies that are pre-positioned around Florida to move in. When I spoke to him much earlier today, he was still concerned that it might be also the Carolinas. Since the 5 o'clock track and the 11 o'clock track, it looks like that once it gets past Jacksonville, it's going to take a hard right and go on out into the Atlantic. But the cone of uncertainty is still there. And that cone of uncertainty could have it taking a left hook into the coast, anywhere along the coast. The difference between the 5 a.m. and the 11 a.m. track, that there was a slight shift at Andros Island in the Bahamas to the east, although the track was still showing it coming in right next to Cape Canaveral. For those that are a little further south, the Army Corps of Engineers is quite concerned